It's time for us to come up with our New Year's resolutions, which I am fairly confident in saying you will not actually follow. Why do I feel so confident in saying that? Well, it's borne out in the statistics. Statistically speaking, people do not stick with New Year's resolutions. They may start with the best of intentions. Their resolution may be something that objectively would be for their betterment, but all of that doesn't matter because when we form resolutions, we tend to just go off and do our own thing. According to a study from Ohio State University, I refuse to call it the Ohio State University because that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. According to a study from Ohio State University, only about 9% of individuals who will form a resolution at the beginning of the year will end up sticking with it throughout the end of that calendar year. It actually gets above 20% individuals who have dropped their resolution by the first week alone, and then that number doubles of people who have dropped their resolution by the end of January. Statistically speaking, if you form a resolution, no matter how excited you are, no matter how much you're surrounded by other individuals or bombarded by things on TikTok or whatever it is motivating you to change, you will fail. At least statistically speaking. Maybe you're lucky and maybe you're part of that 9%. But most of us won't end up, losing that weight or won't end up dropping that bad habit. What does this have to do with church? People end up doing the exact same thing when it comes to resolutions that they set for themselves at different stages of life when it comes to their walk with Christ. People will decide that, I'm going to change how I live. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to start praying every single day. I'm going to start insert blank, whatever thing it is you want to do to make you feel like you have a better relationship with Jesus Christ. And those are good things. Those are things that you should be excited about. But yet, just like a New Year's resolution, so often we end up falling to the wayside and we end up falling back into whatever old habits are, or we end up not doing the things that we set out to try to do on a regular basis. There are a lot of reasons for that, and this isn't a concept that's something that it was unknown to Christ. He actually told parables about this that we'll go into. But right now, what I want you to do is I want you to pause and just ask yourself, what are some of these resolutions that you have set out in your life? Both things that are New Year's resolutions and things that you set out as goals in your spiritual walk. What are some of the similarities in how you maybe started out enthusiastic, but something got in the way or something ended up getting overlooked and suddenly you became part of not the 9%, but the 91% who didn't follow through? When I did youth ministry years ago, I saw this over and over and over again. People who had those best of intentions and they wanted to do good things, and maybe they even had people that were behind them, rooting them on, but they just couldn't follow through. There was something that prevented them from sticking with that resolution they were making in their life to maybe live a different way or to improve how they knew Christ through prayer or meditation or scriptural reading or whatever it may be. Christ understood this, and he actually told parables about these things in ways that we would understand. You may be familiar with one of them that you'll read here in a second, that is about an individual who scattered seed, and some of the seed fell on different ground. Now, as you go through, you'll be able to see some metaphors for maybe different situations people find themselves in, but what you end up seeing in that metaphor is that the seed that took root fell on fertile ground. It wasn't bombarded by all these other things around it. It wasn't eaten by the birds. It wasn't choked by the thorns, but seed that falls on fertile ground will take root and it will grow up to be strong. In the same way as Christians who may want to make our own commitment to Jesus Christ or may want to recommit ourselves to Jesus Christ, we have to consider what kind of ground we are falling on. Are we trying to live in infertile ground, in infertile circumstances, bombarded by infertile things, and then just saying, oh, I want Jesus? Or are we willing to actually seek out that fertile ground? If we're an individual who isn't trying to make that commitment, but maybe is in a position to help somebody, to support somebody else as they make that commitment, are we doing what we can to help them be in the most fertile situation humanly possible so that, once again, they become part of that 9% that actually makes it? Now, metaphors are all well and good. We want to make certain that if we're going to try to make a resolution to improve ourselves, that we are living on fertile ground. But what does that mean? What does it mean to live a life where we are ensuring that the things we do and the way we react to things and the way we think is actually something that is accommodating to having this change of heart, to being able to see God work in our lives so that we stick with those commitments we make? Well, sometimes I think it gets a little bit deceptive because we're bombarded by a lot of people who like to tell us what we should look like if we really have Christ in our life, or if we're really on fire. This is something that I think has especially gotten bad with just all the mass media surrounding us, whether it's TV or anything on the internet, social media, whatever. Individuals who you will see that, when they do praise and worship, they say the only way to do praise and worship in an authentic way is where you're sitting there in front of a big band and everybody has their hands up in the air and the fog machines are going with the lights down low and people are just weeping and crying. Not everybody worships that way. And by the same token, you have a lot of people who go the other direction and say like, well, living spiritually means you're very serene and you're very holy acting and that there's a gravitas around you and how you think and you act about Christ. But what's funny is you don't really see that borne out in a lot of the very common behavior in the Bible from the apostles themselves, who often were not refined individuals deserving of any kind of gravitas. Instead, what you end up seeing is something that is actually very unremarkable. Paul writes about this unremarkable aspect of people's lives when he talks about something that a lot of your Bibles will call Christian ethics. He goes through and he starts describing what it looks like to be an individual who has Christ in your life, and what you start seeing is that it's not somebody who's crazy and rash and bombastic and all that, and it's also not somebody who holds back. Instead, it's somebody who is kind of strangely boring. It's somebody who, when they encounter dramatic times in their lives, they don't wail and moan and just go to social media and start crying and all that. But, it's also somebody who, when they find themselves in a situation where they have a right to be mad, doesn't, get super mad. It's somebody who, actually has almost a tameness to them. Again, they're kind of boring, and that's kind of unusual because you think about a lot of contemporary evangelical Christianity and it's so counter to what a lot of them kind of portray. But reading your small groups, what Paul talks about as being an individual who exudes this fertile ground that it takes in order to have a deeply rooted relationship with Jesus Christ. And then I want you to ask yourself, why might having this unassuming life be something that actually helps you see God better? How might you holding back, trying to express God and force those godly situations in your life allow you to better see how God works on a day-to-day basis in both the big things and in the small? Now, I don't want anybody to be confused here. Nothing I'm saying here is to say that we shouldn't be zealous for our God, that we shouldn't have an enthusiasm, that we shouldn't be excited to share with other people the love and the grace and compassion that Jesus Christ has showed us. We should absolutely have a level of radicalism about how we pursue our passions and about how we pursue the calling that we feel like God has laid in our lives. Those are things that should not be tempered at all. But it is to say that just in our individual responses to things that we see in our lives, that we should be cautious to not try to create the God situation. Instead, we should allow ourselves to be reduced. As John the Baptist says, we should allow ourselves to decrease so that Christ can become increased. And that is just as much a lesson against us having a prideful arrogance about ourselves as much as it is trying to temper our responses and try to ensure that we're not trying to force the God into something, but instead we are approaching our commitments, our resolutions to God with a spirit of humility and a spirit of receptiveness, not trying to force a calling and not trying to force where God may be directing us, but instead are willing to be patient, to have a sense of contentment, to have a sense of joy, whether we're in good circumstances or bad circumstances, understanding that if we remove ourselves from the equation, God will make himself evident. I don't know what your resolution is, but I hope in whatever it is that you're able to pause, you're able to temper it just a little bit with a good sense of realism and a good sense of understanding that God is ultimately what is going to make your resolution come to fruition. It's not going to be because you divined it or because you forced a relationship with God. It's going to be because Christ pursues you. That's why Jesus Christ came to this earth, was to be in pursuit of you. And so if we will remove ourselves from the equation and we will learn what it means to be content, we will learn to live by these Christian ethics that Paul explained, then I think we'll be amazed at how we see God producing fertile ground in our lives. That's our lesson we have for you today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. And until we meet again, Happy New Year and God bless.